No Way Out 2004, which of course you have chosen for this week's retro ups and downs, is when the one and only Eddie Guerrero won the WWE title. Now, it seems almost silly to say this 16 years later, but if you actually go back to 2004 and read what some individuals were saying about this, they could not believe they lost their mind that Eddie Guerrero, at only 5'7", was going to be the man leading WWE into WrestleMania 20. It goes to show hindsight and context are just crazy tamales. Thing is, all this chatter had an effect on Guerrero because he was old school. Now that he was the top guy, he believed that any money coming through the door was on him, and if it started to go in the wrong direction, well, he started to worry. And that's notably what happened here. It's kind of different today given how the wrestling industry has changed, but when business didn't pick up, the powers that be said, man, maybe we should take the title off Eddie and, give himself a little bit of a rub before we can actually coronate him again. And that's what they did. The real shame is that just as we were about to do this and get round two, and never forget the second title reign is often better than the first because you feel more prepared for it, Eddie Guerrero passed away at just 38 years old. I still remember waking up that day and going on a wrestling news site and seeing that, and I kept refreshing the page pretty much for the rest of the day because I could not believe my eyes. Found in a hotel room by nephew Chavo, the official cause of death was ruled as an acute heart failure, probably caused by all the struggles that Eddie was having in his personal life. Or I say having, I mean had. That was the worst thing about all of this. He had finally gotten clean and he'd gotten rid of all his addictions and he was living a healthy life. And then all of that abuse caught up to him. He passed away before he was even 40 years old. I mean, it sucks. It really does suck. What the hell can we do? But yes, way back in 2004, he won a Royal Rumble on SmackDown only 4 days after the actual Royal Rumble. Because WWE may be weird now, but it was also weird back then, which meant he was the #1 contender. And kind of sadly for him, his opponent was going to be Brock Lesnar. Going down on the 15th of February, which is 2 days before my birthday, if you so care, make sure you send me some love. It happened in the Cow Palace in front of a sold-out crowd. And now that I've gone through it, I'm just going to be honest with you, it's a one-match show. I mean, I know why you picked it, but come on. Let's up those downs. First thing you see at No Way Out 2004 is Sable and Tori Wilson coming to the ring, getting a microphone and going, oh, anything can happen tonight on this pay-per-view. And then they allude, when they go backstage, they're going to get it on. I mean, what do you want me to do? I made the fatal error too of watching this show with a non-wrestling fan, and when I stared over at their face, they looked absolutely horrified, and ironically then turned to me and said, why? And I was like, I don't know. Why are you asking if I made them leave? I said, just leave, get out of here. And I cried for a while, and I, went and got a potato, and I just did that and had some mashed potato because I thought it would cheer me up. Point is, I get it, different time, but I don't care. I don't care. This is the kind of stuff why people don't get into wrestling. Down. And that was also kind of true of our first match, which is the most mid-2000s WWE thing ever, because it's Rikishi teaming up with Scotty 2 Hotty, the last members of Too Cool who used to dance, and they were taking on the Bashams and Shaniqua. Now, let's be honest, who remembers Shaniqua? That's no offense to her, but it's been a long ass time. I will say this though, I quite liked her. At one point, she just wrecked Scotty 2 Hotty with his clothesline when she was on the apron, and he sold it like he had fallen off of a cliff. Also, the big tease and story here was that Rikishi was going to take his ass and plant it into her face. And of course, talking about the stink face, once again, don't forget I watched this with a non-wrestling fan. We were having bad times. Michael Cole and Taz on commentary also basically tell you who's going to win this, because they're like, wait, Shanique was in the match, and so the tag team titles are on the line. They're like, well, if she makes the pin, who the hell's going to be the tag champion? Is she going to be the tag champion, or the Basham's going to be the tag champion? I was like, clearly Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty aren't going to lose their belts. Thanks a lot, you idiots. It's just all so confusing, but the reason that she had been put in this match, or so it does seem, is that she had heat backstage, apparently had a bad attitude, and had been late to so many house shows, they fined her ass. And talking about giant asses falling on your face, she also took the pin here after Rikishi gave her the bonsai drop. And she doesn't put her arms up, he just crushes her ribs. It was also the last time we'd see her in WWE, which probably proves all those reports I just talked about true, marking her goodbye after she did win the second season of Tough Enough in 2002. Sadly for her though, bad news is coming. Is a down. Talking about Tough Enough, Nydia was then here, and as you remember, she was the co-winner of Tough Enough Season 1 alongside Maven, and while she had a pretty decent character, especially because she had that relationship with Jamie Noble, I do not remember them ever fighting, and then on No Way Out 2004, they having a fight. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't, and then I was doubly shocked, because when did she leave the company? And it was November of this year, and I kind of understand it, because the whole Jamie Noble thing was done, but you'd think they could have found something for her. I always thought she had something. The best bit about all of this is that Jamie Noble comes out to the most generic theme song you've ever heard in your life. Maybe it's been overdubbed now and he had a different one back in the day, but it's like you just gave a child a guitar and you went, play a wrestling theme, and it just went, dun 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 dun. Oh, sweet, we'll use it. The stipulation here is also that it's a blindfold match, or that Jamie has to wear a blindfold and Nydia doesn't. So of course, once again, this being WWE in the mid-2000s, a large part of it is Noble almost accidentally grabbing her breasts because he doesn't know where he actually is in the ring. You already know what I'm going to say. Yes, the non-wrestling fan, they were just terrified and perturbed and upset. I'm not going to lie, so was I. I think what really sums this up is that it didn't even go 5 minutes, and of course we had Jamie Noble cheat to win. As Nydia was climbing up to the top rope, and therefore he's like, no, Nydia, no! As if she was about to jump into some burning acid. He picked the hood up, he saw where she was, grabbed her, chucked her on the floor, and actually made her choke out, or tapped her out, to a dragon sleeper. Found that quite funny. Can't pin her, we better try and suffocate her. To be fair, the crowd was super into this, and that likely means that it was a good match. But I had to not only suffer through it, I had to do it while trying to explain to my buddy that it would be a good idea if we remained friends. You just never need to watch this. Honestly, I don't remember it back in 2004, and I certainly didn't need to be reminded of it in 2020. Down. An absurdly young Kurt Angle is then on screen. And this isn't me taking a shot at him or taking a slight. It's just when you see someone look this young, well, you just can't believe it. And it makes you realize that life is just a piece of trash, isn't it? It's such a tease. He was talking about an attack that had happened on SmackDown, though, when he was meant to team with Eddie Guerrero, taking on the Big Show and Brock Lesnar. But then somebody had attacked him in the back. It meant John Cena had to be drafted in, as Kurt hadn't figured out who it was. He was on the investigation trail. Angle was convinced that it must have been Big Show or Cena, and it makes sense with the latter because that man can't be seen. When John arrived and went like, no, it wasn't me, and Kurt didn't like that, so they started to have a fight. Anyway, long story short, General Manager Paul Heyman had decided that it should be Big Show versus John Cena versus Kurt Angle at the pay-per-view, with the winner going on to WrestleMania 20 to get a WWE title shot. So even though this was our sub-main event, it had some serious stakes. Right, you know how in 2020 we get random matches, and you don't really know why they've happened, but you just go, well, it's because modern WWE is crap? Nope, we were also doing it in 2004, because then it was just the APA versus the world's greatest tag team. They weren't in a feud, they didn't have any beef with each other. I mean, Shelton Benjamin and Bradshaw had a match on SmackDown, and Bradshaw had hurt his arm a little bit, but apparently that was cause enough to say, hey, we've got a really big event in a few days, why don't you all have a tag team match? Taz tries to justify this, saying, well, it's strikers versus grapplers. Like, what the hell are you talking about, you idiot? Both teams are striking and grappling, but I guess at least he made an attempt. And my main takeaway from this is that Bradshaw in 2004 had absolutely no idea that wrestling was fake. The powerbomb he gives Shelton Benjamin is what you would do if you were actually trying to powerbomb somebody in reality. And the clothesline from hell. I know there have been worse ones, but I'm talking about in the context of seeing this. He hits Charlie Haas so hard, I think Charlie Haas actually did get decapitated, but it was too much for my brain to process, so I just saw it as a normal clothesline. I tell you what though, I kind of liked it. I don't even know why, maybe I was just looking desperately for anything to take my fancy. It also makes no sense once again, because on SmackDown, Bradshaw had hurt his arm, and yet Farouk is the dude having his arm worked over here. But I don't need to make sense of this, it was 16 years ago. I think it was the finish that mostly did it for me, because it was kind of out of nowhere. After Bradshaw had hit his running death arm, which is what it should be called, he thought that Charlie Haas was a legal man, but he was a numpty and he was wrong. It was Shelton Benjamin, he smashed out the super kick, and it allowed him to get the 1, 2, 3. And I was surprised. In my head, Bradshaw never lost, or at least refused to be pinned. I also got a kick out of it because Benjamin is just so good, and you kind of look back now and realize that he was never given his due. And what really put it over the edge was every time Farouk was in the ring on offense, he was just shouting, "Get up, Charlie!" and then, "Get up, Shelton!" He was like your dad, and he was trying to teach you how to fight. Get it up. And then finally, the big narrative of the night kicked into gear, because in the weeks and months preceding No Way Out 2004, WWE had basically walked around waving a big flag that said, "We're going to do Brock Lesnar and Goldberg at WrestleMania 20, and if you don't get excited, well, more for you." It all began at the Raw Rumble, which of course is WWE's annual event that officially has no rules, because even though Brock wasn't in the thing, he just wandered down, gave Goldberg the F5, that allowed Kurt Angle to throw Bill Goldberg out, and all the officials and referees were like, "Yeah, that's fine by us. We don't give a shit. Sorry, Billy Boy, out you go." They then started to take shots on Raw and SmackDown because they were separated by the brand split, which is why Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was the sheriff of Raw, was like, "Goldberg, here's a ticket." Maybe he was broke at the time. I don't know why he could have bought his own. But he said, "Why don't you go to the pay-per-view and say hello to the Beast?" So he did. Anyway, it was after this tag team match when Goldberg did arrive and the crowd absolutely lost their mind. He's also wearing a Santa's Sleigh t-shirt here, which was a movie he was going to coming out soon. But if you didn't know that, you just assumed he hated Christmas, and I guess you could double down on that because he is Jewish. I'm Jewish too, more proof that he is my dad. Despite this being only a 2.5-hour pay-per-view as well, this thing was a really well thought out and chunky segment. I couldn't quite believe it because you don't usually get story-bending twists in your pay-per-views. But after he had sat down, Paul Heyman couldn't believe it, and he walked down and he tried to pretend he didn't know who the former WCW champion was. He did know who he was though, so he called himself Heyman, which is a play on Goldberg. That was weird. He said that if he did anything tonight, he would throw his ass in jail, which of course is when Brock Lesnar also came out. It's like, "What are you gonna do, Bill? What are you gonna do? You know what? You're a bitch." And that's a trigger word in WWE. If you call another wrestler a bitch, all of a sudden they get really mad and they will come and attack you. Which he did. Goldberg did slip out of the F5 and turn it into the jackhammer, which was an absolutely brutal spot. And I started cheering like I was actually back in 2004. I was like, "Get him, Daddy, get him." And Heyman couldn't believe all this and started shouting, "Help, help." And he did get help. The police actually arrived and they arrested Goldberg and they took him away. In a really nice spin as well, the SmackDown crew absolutely hated Goldberg, especially Michael Cole and Taz. They were like, "Yeah, get that Raw red ass out of here." And this was at the point when WWE were trying to establish that it was Raw versus SmackDown. Well, let's face it, they never really did. To have this just slap bang in the middle though felt so different, even if it was building to a WrestleMania main event. And it's a shame that we know now what we do know. There's no point watching that match again either because it's just boo, boo, you suck. But I massively got into this. I thought it was really well done. A little bit strange that WWE did allow them to clash before the big event. But again, I don't need to worry about that. This is basically from the 30s. Hardcore Holly of all people then chased Brock Lesnar off because of course at the Rumble they had a match for the World Championship, and I think that was a terrible mistake because here Lesnar was meant to be this like all-encompassing monster who could whip your ass, and then out comes a flipping race car driver and scares him off. The only good thing about this is that it does allow me to tell you my favourite story from Bob Holly's autobiography, when management said to him, "Well, Bob, what would you like us to do with you?" And he said, "Well, I want to kick everybody's ass and I want to win the title." Michael Cole then told us that Rhino, Bob Holly's opponent's legs were huge, and imagine if they were wrapped around you. That's what he said. I couldn't stop laughing. In fact, I was in tears. I mean, he has a point. He did have big thighs, and if they were wrapped around me, I'd be like, "How the hell did I get here? Kind of like a snake trying to choke you." But it sounded very, very weird, and it sounded very, very sexual. And I felt massively sorry for both these guys, because they didn't stand a chance. Nobody in the crowd cared that they were about to have a match when they just see two behemoths trying to kick the crap out of each other. Now, they did come a little bit alive when Rhino must have been taking advice from Bradshaw and absolutely ruined Bob Holly with a gore that took him out the ring. But even then, as soon as they could calm down, everybody just calmed down. The finish was really rubbish too, because Bob was able to get back in at the count of 9. So, Rhino was in control. And then he just gave him an Alabama slam, and Rhino lost. I was like, that is the most anticlimactic thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Now, that's actually quite good, because it means I must have had a pretty good life. But still, it's supposed to build and then poof, down. It was then time for another amazing narrative on this evening, because we were going to get Rey Mysterio versus Chavo Guerrero. And do you know why Chavo was mad at Rey? Because that masked asshole had recorded a song for No Way Out, the pay-per-view itself, and ain't nobody asked Chavo. I'd be mad at this too. Saying that, there was better stuff here as well, because Chavo felt like he was drastically underlooked compared to Uncle Eddie, And I swear, everybody at this time just hated Eddie Guerrero with every sense of their being because he was the better Guerrero, he was the best family member, and he was going to prove it by winning the Cruiserweight Championship, which of course was held by Rey Mysterio. He also went as far to absolutely destroy Eddie backstage on SmackDown and then pretended that he didn't do it. And the real kicker here was that both guys were going to have somebody in their corner. Rey was going to have boxer Jorge Payaz, or George Payaz, I can't pronounce it. They said it about 72 different ways on No Way Out, so you just have to think I'm an idiot, which I am. But in Chavo Guerrero's corner was Chavo Sr., his actual dad. This was the first time that he was in WWE, the first and only time, and he somehow still managed to win the Cruiserweight Champion, which means even now in 2020, he is the oldest Cruiserweight champ ever. Before we did get to this fight though, man, we had one of those The Undertaker is coming back videos, and I loved it back then, and I love them now. This one was especially cool because it was when The Undertaker was about to be the dead man for the first time in ages, and when it just flashed up on screen 28 days later, I got goosebumps. I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's almost 2 decades, 20 years later, and I'm pretending I don't know what's going on. These were always good. I know some people don't like hocus pocus in wrestling. Well, you can call me Mr. Hocus Pocus is getting up. Otherwise, Rey versus Chavo absolutely rocked. I mean, who is surprised by that? But it really made me realize that Rey Mysterio is a legend. I mean, he's so good back here and he's so good now. How is he not a bona fide Hall of Famer? That's nothing against Chavo Guerrero, who I truly believe is underrated as well. But Rey's just magic in your hand. Up. So I was cheering for him as much as today when he only has one eye, when the stupid Jorge Payaz, man, the boxer dude, he attacked Chavo Sr. on the outside, and the referee watched this, he witnessed it, and because officials were better back in 2004, he went, all right, well, now you've got to leave. But Chavo Sr. can stay because he hasn't done nothing, and this really was going to flub over Rey. It meant when Mysterio was on the top rope, Chavo Sr. just pushed him off, and that allowed Chavo Jr. to hit the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up to get the win and become the champion. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So he'd won in the most asshole way possible, but that worked because he was a giant asshole and he celebrated here like he won the lottery. But really, if you're only going to watch one match here, well, watch Brock Lesnar versus Eddie, but if you're going to watch two, check out this one. You'll just be so flabbergasted by Rey. Really, it's just, I don't get how he's been doing it so long. He's still a terrible father. There's a little bit of an awkward bit afterwards when Chavo and Chavo Sr. are outside Eddie Guerrero's locker room just shouting he's never going to win anything big because he's an addict and a loser. And they didn't know that at the time, but obviously, you know, knowing what we do now, you're like, oh, this is horrible and we shouldn't have done it. But hey, it was going to tie in to what they were going to do later on. It was then time for the triple threat match I told you about earlier when Big Show was taking on John Cena, who was taking on Kurt Angle, with the very, very strong narrative here being Big Show is big, John Cena and Kurt Angle are not as big. Can they take him off his feet? John Cena was still the rapper here and actually gets cheered on his entrance. And of course he does a rap which ends with him saying something like block or lock because he wants the crowd to shout cock. If you don't know, cock is your penis. This was quite fun in the early going though, because Kurt Angle, being the Olympic gold medalist, like, well, I can pick him up, and he tried and failed. And even though John Cena was laughing at him, Kurt was like, all right, well, you go. And Cena went and he failed. It was just kind of a nice little thing, and of course it meant then Cena and Angle tried to work together, but even then Big Show was just swatting people away like flies. Ultimately for Cena, this all went very badly when he got thrown over the top rope and injured his knee, which was a focal point of the match, but he was still able to give Big Show the FU, it wasn't the AA just yet, which is, that's incredible, it always will be, as was Angle when he angle slammed Big Show over the top rope, which basically took him out of the match. The finish also got a serious reaction out of me because it did focus on Cena's leg. Kurt Angle locked in a leg lock as you would be wont to do should you be trying to achieve this, and John Cena tapped out. I don't remember John Cena ever tapping out. In fact, I thought that was in the laws of pro wrestling. The laws of WWE is like, you know, you win by 3 count, you can submit someone, but also John Cena never taps out ever, otherwise Vince McMahon will come and he'll rip off your hair. I think the fans felt the same way because they popped huge when Kurt was able to win, and of course this was going to set up Kurt Angle versus Eddie Guerrero at WrestleMania 20, which is flipping awesome. It was then time for our main event, and I tell you this, it's still very special. Like, if you experienced it live, you know, and even if you weren't watching wrestling back then, you can just load it up on your WWE network, make sure you get all the context and the content in your brain, and if you don't like this, well, I will go as far to say maybe you're not a wrestling fan. It's just every reason we watch this crazy sports entertainment nonsense to begin with, That's why it gets a golden nut. It also goes 30 minutes, which is nuts, and WWE couldn't have picked a better night to decide to coronate Eddie Guerrero, because he is more popular than the most popular person in the world. And the really cool thing here is that you can feel that every single fan is behind him, but they're also not 100% sure they believe it, because of course he's taken on Brock Lesnar, that like Vince McMahon carved him himself and then brought him to life like Frankenstein's monster and sent him to the ring. That's also how this match starts. Lesnar is just absolutely ruining Eddie. It's a bit like Brock versus Cena from SummerSlam 2014. I mean, one of the backdrops he gives Eddie is so high, I'm surprised he ever came back down to earth. And when he suplexes him later on, once again, he must have called Bradshaw beforehand and said, "Can you let me know how to do a real suplex?" And Bradshaw went, "Yeah, just flub him up." But it's not like Brock wasn't doing this to himself as well, because the reason Guerrero is able to get in control is because Lesnar runs at him, goes to give him a high knee in the corner, misses, throws himself over the ring post, and just flunks himself on the floor. And I tell you, it's here when you really realise that Brock overall is one of the best ever. And that's going to drive people nuts, but it's true. When he's in control, he looks like an unstoppable machine, but as soon as he starts selling for you, all of a sudden, everything just turns around. So I was watching it going, well, before this, Brock was like 10'2" and Eddie Guerrero was nothing but a fish. But now, Eddie Guerrero looks like Godzilla and Brock Lesnar looks like a terrified bunny rabbit. And that's all based on his shoulders, and of course, Eddie Guerrero's great. And if you want some evidence, well, look at this. Guerrero works over Brock Lesnar's leg to such a degree, when Lesnar goes to give him a suplex later on in the match, he does so on one leg. That is just tremendous selling and not something you really see in the modern day. The real shame is that maybe WWE didn't believe in Guerrero 100%, because there is a lot of gaga and there is a lot of nonsense towards the end of this, which does wind up in him becoming the WWE Champion. Now, they do have a get out of jail free card in the sense it was tying into WrestleMania 20, but it's just that little asterisk I would like to blow away. Because after Eddie's flailing foot hits a referee when he's getting F5'd, who of course returns from the police station but Goldberg, who's like wearing cuffs that have been torn apart because he's really cool. Once again, he's been getting lessons from Bradshaw and spears the life out of Brock Lesnar. But this is when the crowd really starts to ramp up, because they're like, oh my gosh, maybe Eddie's gonna win. The noise then enters another dimension, another reality, when he's able to reverse the F5 into a tornado DDT onto the world title belt. And then he climbs to the top rope. I'm going to close my eyes because it's so good. He climbs to the top rope. He gives him the frog splash. He gets the 1, 2, 3. And it may just be the most satisfying reaction you've ever heard in your life. And honestly, if you want to see happiness etched onto somebody's face, look at Eddie Guerrero. At that time, I realized, oh no, this is terrible. Somebody's cutting onions. And it just hit me right in the tum-tum. I was invested. This is real emotion. So screw anyone that says wrestling isn't able to do it. I'd give it 1,000,000 stars. But you don't care about my ridiculous rating system, so as always, I have the ones from lovely Dave Meltzer, who really does divide opinion. He's just a guy doing a job. But Too Cool versus the Bashims, he gave 1.25 star. Nydia versus Noble got a dud rating, so thumbs down. World's Greatest Tag Team versus APA also got 1 1/4 star. Rhino versus Hardcore Holly got 1 3/4 stars. Well done, guys, you're smashing it. Mysterio versus Chavo got 3 1/4 stars. A little unfair, Dave, but hey, you do you. Cena versus Angle versus Show got 3 stars. And Guerrero versus Lesnar got 4 stars. So he's only, well, he's like 1,000,000 off, because I would now give it 1,004 stars. And so yeah, you picked No Way Out 2014, but really we could have just cut out 3/4 of this and talked about the main event, but it's so good the overall show gets an up. Now once again, I'm going to remind you, this is the point where you go in the comments and you suggest shows, and the most upvoted ones get put into the poll. People keep messaging me going, Simon, why do you keep picking these shows? I don't pick the shows, you do, but you can choose whatever the hell you want. Now again, yes, don't forget to leave a comment below and let us know, one, what do you think about No Way Out 2004, but also what show do you want us to do next? Then like the video, share the video, subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling, head over to WhatCulture.com and read yourself some articles. Follow WhatCulture on Twitter, WhatCulture WWE, and watch more videos. Go watch the last Retro Ups and Downs. Can't remember what it was. It was SummerSlam 2013. I don't know. No, it wasn't. It was Survivor Series 2001. Watch both. My name is Simon for WhatCulture. Thank you for joining me as always. Have yourself a lovely good time. I'll see you soon.